Bam.
This is Jeff Stewart, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
I don't know how often these kind of things get to happen where you get to have these two combat guys who were both very seasoned when they meet each other for the first time. I had developed a system through many, many units, many rotations, watching units rotate over the top of me, coming to a new unit. So I was able to uniquely communicate to you like what I offered, but you also, and I learned to speak commander colonel specifically. You also learned something along the way where you're like, hey, whatever this guy's selling, I'm into it. And so we both had this very apexy point in our careers where we were able to maybe do some uncommon things. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't think there was any doubt about it. I mean, we had both gone through some development. We both had some experiences in Iraq, and we had done some studies on our own. We had looked into some stuff. We had some experience with, the cultural evolution and how you have to interact culturally, and how that's just as important as how you interact, in a military manner, particularly with your host nation folks. And that, sometimes the book doesn't have the right answer, so you got to kind of throw it out once in a while, take a chance on something else. And I think it kind of clicked where we had both had similar experiences. We were both looking for something different. We were both looking how to make a difference in our time frame there, and we just happened to be the right place, right time to help each other, along with Rich.
Yeah, yeah. And Rich came in along the way, and Rich has been on the show a bunch of times. When what's your impression of me when I walk in the room? Because I have my whole speech that the colonels had taught me previously, and I talk about audacity and everything, and how in 3 weeks and you're going to understand me. In 3 months, you're going to be like invaluable. I need you here all the time. So when someone walks into your office and says that, like I'm not a lieutenant walking in, I'm not even a captain. I'm just this
Right.
guy with beard. So what's your impression?
Um, Usually it's met with a little bit of skepticism. My experience with most of those folks coming in, and you and I at least had some military shared experiences in the background that helped us to connect. A lot of times you don't get those. You get folks that are coming in, they're social workers, they're sociologists, those kind of folks. They'll walk in and they think they've had the answers, and a lot of times they've got a good portion of the answers, but there are things about the military culture, about the military systems, about the government systems, what you can and can't do, that maybe they don't understand. And they're used to working with non-governmental organizations, which in some ways have more latitude, in other ways they have less latitude. And so you always read it because everybody always comes in enthusiastic and, hey, we're here to help you. We're here to save everything for you. But you try to figure out how you could best integrate them into the team, and at the same time, augment them. And in particular, we didn't have as much trouble with you as we did with some of the other folks. Get them to understand military culture and how to say things in military jargon, so that you get the support of your boss and his boss for the wild and crazy things that you decide you want to try to do.
One of the things that I needed all the time from commanders was I needed that top cover. And I didn't mind being wrong about something and having you like, and I probably told you, I'm going to need you to fine tune how I'm doing because I don't have your view of things and I'm not supposed to, right? I'm supposed to give you the ground truth. And if I'm giving you too much of this or too much of that, I need you to guide me more towards it. But I'm not your average Intel guy. I mean, most
Nope.
Intel people, they're like, I know more than this kid does. Sorry. And so there's that need, and the other need is that I need to be. And I had to learn this from the sergeant majors as well. I needed to learn how to speak command sergeant major, which I learned how to do because those guys would kill me in the staff room. But I needed also protection from the ideas because I want to give out ideas. I'm like, I'm not going to give these guys any answers because I don't know the answers. I'm just going to keep giving you information, and we'll kind of sort it out until you as a commander know what you want to do, what resources you want to put to bear. And it turned out for us, a lot of what I was bringing you were unknown wins and things that we had to do nothing to gain except for just shutting up. So that top cover and just the overall changing how the organization works, because it was dramatically different than what you train up for at NTC.
Right. That absolutely is. You focus on the kinetic piece of it. Everybody's focused on shoot, move, communicate, because you want to bring everyone home alive. So that's what the focus is. And a lot of times we did do some cultural training. We did do some translator training, but it was usually focused on key leaders or on what not to do as opposed on what to do.
Right.
So we've gotten pretty good over the years on, helping people be more culturally aware and teaching them how not to be offensive, which is extremely important. But what we didn't spend time doing is talking to them about, okay, how can you use that culture to your advantage? Who is going to be your cultural advisor? Who are going to be the people? And it's not intel people usually. It's the other people that you turn to say, how is this going to be perceived by the local population? Who are the influencers in the area that I need to get buy-in from? Is this idea even stupid? Who should I run it by to see whether it's going to work or not? It's the whole, you walk into the village and instead of saying, bring me the village elder, you walk in and say, hey, if somebody stole your goat, who would you go to for help?
Right. Exactly. There are so many questions I want to ask you, get into with this, because this is fascinating. So the area where the brigade above you, and I don't know if you guys were, I think you guys were an attachment to them, if I remember correctly. We
went through about 4 brigades there for a while.
That's the other thing. It's all so crazy. So it seems like almost, and my rule became, unless you can prove you're a net stabilizer, you're destabilizing the region, right? And so that's like whenever person or team, myself, whoever it is that shows up, it's like, you are making it harder right now. How do we stop, slow down, do less, be more accurate, be efficient, be more delicate, understand we're going to make mistakes? Because I mean, you pick anything, an infantry platoon, they're destabilizing the area. I remember they did mobile governance was one of the initiatives, and it's like, please stop kidnapping the governor and forcing him to go throughout the valley. And then in Zabul, there was this district where we focused our efforts at in Mazan, and you couldn't reliably patrol too far away from home because it's just, people don't understand how rugged and remote and how hard it is to move things around, because the QRF, by the time any QRF got there, the fight would be over.
Yeah, well, particularly Mizan, when we first got there, that place had been cut off. We were doing aerial resupply. You couldn't get in by ground for like 5 years. And I mean, it got to the point where the Taliban was sending us messages saying, hey, could you clear this road? Because we don't even know where all the IEDs are anymore. We can't get through here either. So, when things are that bad, we ended up having a huge operation to be able to get in there. But that drastically makes your job of trying to protect the population, get out and among them, and allow that district governor to do his job tremendously difficult.
There were a couple things you tasked me with when I first got there, and I want to get into those. But before that, I want to branch out real quick and go up in terms of echelons, and let's talk about Route Chicken, which is the route you're talking about, which is the dirt road between us and humanity. Like you said, you guys worked hard to stabilize that route, but even that route was not a route you could travel every day in a military vehicle. It would just destroy the vehicle. Yeah. Right. But at the PRT, and for people watching, a PRT is a Provincial Reconstruction Team. And at this point, we'd been in Afghanistan for 10 years. There were pictures on the wall of the opening of Route Chicken from some years past, right? And so, like, I would look at that, like I can never forget this lesson. Like, here we are, you got pictures on the wall of something we did, but we actually didn't accomplish it. It was temporary.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, we ran into those type of fleeting situations all the time, and we would go in with the best intentions, but until you walk yourself through the second, third order effects and how you're going to sustain that. And typically, those big wins are the ones that tend to get undermined over time. It's the little incremental wins that add up over time to give you success. So looking at those, you have to put it into account. And that's why we did Operation Fairbanks to open Route Chicken there. I mean, we put it in the hands of the host nation security forces. And we went to General John Muldoon, the brigade commander, and said, hey, how do you want to open this? And how are you going to provide security for everyone afterwards? Because it's not a one-time go. You don't just clear it from one end to the other and now, okay, everything's good to go. Those IEDs are there for a reason, and they're going to be right back there the next day if you don't figure out how to secure it in between times.
Yeah. And that is one of the lessons. One of the things I realized, it wasn't that we fought 21-year wars. We sure did that. we also had absolute amnesia as to what had been done before. So there was no stacking of wins. There was no progress. I mean, if I was to go to Afghanistan and we were there, someone in the intelligence shop, the two shop, would task me, hey, how many schools are in this region?
Right.
No, like this is the wrong question to be asking, right? And so we struggled to find these wins. I remember during the time we were together, some general from somewhere, probably like the division level command in the southern region, came out and was like, "We're gonna fix the bazaar," and he was briefing all of these Afghan elders who were sitting there, and I'm like, "You irrelevant, like absolutely clueless person. This is a general, and I'm trying to have respect for this guy, and everything he's saying is so. And I think about like Star Wars, like you're up in this spaceship, you're in this Star Destroyer, and now you're
Right.
coming down here and telling me how you're going to improve my life, and he had no earthly clue. And I know the brigade had this initiative, right, to improve the bazaar, and I was working on that, but that stuff that takes time to develop. And is it even the right thing? When should we have it? All of these questions go into that. And so now we're talking about a general being so irrelevant. I don't even want him in the region.
Well, that goes back, I think, to, I mean, part of it is it's hard to know what's going on the ground because you get these reports from all over the place. And of course, you're supposed to be looking at the big picture, but sometimes you need some granularity too. And you've got to have your trusted agents there, the folks that are your intel gatherers for you. And I don't mean that in terms of enemy intelligence. I mean of letting you know what the population is doing, what the population's needs are, and so that you can come up with something that makes sense for them. You know, we think in terms of, hey, let's improve the bazaar. So all we're going to do is slap together a strip mall. We can build that. We build stuff all the time. Let's put a strip mall in place. We'll run a generator up, get some electricity, get some hanging lights, and bam, that everyone will come flocking in. The merchants will love it. The population will love it. But that's not how they do business, and it's not how they sell stuff. If you don't take that into account, you know, it's going to boomerang on you. I remember when we came up with this great idea to build a crop collection facility, because we were going to have them gather all their crops, bring it in, put it in this warehouse, then they could form a co-op, and then they could sell it to the buyers that came from the cities, and they could use their collective bargaining power to get better prices. And so we went through the whole process of building this thing and getting it all ready, only to have it fall flat on their face, because that's not how they sell crops. They sell a field. You know, the buyer comes out from the city, looks at this particular farmer's field. He doesn't count how many pomegranates are there. He just says, I'll give you this much money for that field. And that's the way they do business. Yeah. And so the warehouse sits empty until we figured out to try to make it a bus stop or something, because it completely failed at what we had thought we were doing to help the population.
It is one of the best illustrations of how screwed up we were. Rich and I started collecting collection points, and we would listen to us, the Americans, the Army, talk about how they were going to do it. And it was all this forcing action. We're going to put a collection center in this district. Where are we going to put it? And we would raise our hand. Has anyone asked the governor? No, no. Like, they would be surprised. You know, you're like, aha, there's a problem here. And that's when Rich and I would self-task. We know Jeff doesn't want this. This isn't what Jeff wants to do. So we're going to go, and we're not going to talk. We're not going to go, where should this thing be? We're going to find out about and I remember I talked to the ADT, the Agricultural Development Team.
Right.
This is a major. This is a guy who knows farming. And I said, what is the market chain from these growers to California or whatever it's going to be? And he's like, I don't know. Well, then why are we messing with it? That's my job. Okay. You just write that down, right? And so a lot of what we collected, and you're right, it is intelligence. This is the lesson I learned in Bosnia, was that not all intelligence has to be threat. Everybody's focused on threat, but it's absolutely possible. And we've proven it in 2 different wars recently that you can lose by looking for threat. And in our case, the dead Taliban never showing up, never having a court case ever come up. So we built all these courts and crime labs and all these other things, threat. And none of it works. And so it's like, well, what else can we do? And I would just look around and be like, look, here's an initiative. Is this working? I remember I was briefed during the same time at the brigade level, the CA team. And God bless CA teams. They're doing incredible things. But this is where I bring the value, the intelligence in. So they're like, we're going to go paint the government center, and that's going to connect people to the government. And I'm like, oh, man, I can't wait to sink my teeth in. Here's an implied IR, information requirement. Let me go stab this thing in the heart. I don't care if you paint the building. Just understand you don't know why you're doing it, other than the fact that you have paint and you have to do something.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty typical of the kind of things that would happen because you had so many different organizations. I mean, everyone was throwing resources and people every which direction you could because we all wanted to make a difference. We all wanted to help. And we kind of sort of knew in the back of our head, hey, we're not going to shoot our way out of this war. It ain't going to work. Not going to happen. So what else can we do about it? And, you throw enough Americans and enough money at stuff, we'll make stuff happen. It may not be the right stuff, but we'll make stuff happen. And that's our problem. We didn't have the patience and the foresight to spend time figuring out what the right stuff was. We just kept trying stuff. And some of it worked, some of it didn't. All right, let's go on to the next one. Let's do it again.
Yeah, that is exactly what we did. So when I met with you, you're like, hey, sure, I'll take your challenge. I'll put you to work. And so here are my big 3 questions. And you said, help me understand this bazaar area and like what it takes to do it. The Afghans won't take our aid. I'd like to figure out why and what we do about that. And then you said there was this, I called it like dinner theater, where the Taliban would show up and they would shoot at us. And that sounds dramatic. And of course it is, because bullets are flying towards the camp. And there was this recoilless rifle, which is the worst named weapon ever. And so they would shoot all this stuff at us, right? And then it's like, why are they doing that? Like, what do we do about it? And so these are like the basic taskings. And when you think like, all right, dummy, go figure that out. And I'm like, gosh, I don't know how to figure that out other than just working, right? And you just start somewhere. And so I started talking to the chief of police. Oh, and there was also the governor won't go to the district, right? Because it's way off the beaten path. Right. He won't go out there and govern. Why? And so, I call it tabula rasa. I'm like, I'm blank slate. I'm just going to go and use my experience, but not make assumptions about what's going on there. And I'll be damned if we didn't start as a unit to figure out some of these answers.
Yeah, I mean, that's asking the right questions, obviously, is the thing that'll lead you to the right answers. The problem is most of us make our own assumptions, or we ask our own staff for those answers rather than turning to the host nation folks, the folks that live there, that work there, that know everyone there. Because as we know, in that part of the world, all relationships are personal. Yeah. They don't have those transactional relationships. When I walk in the room, they're like, oh, here's the colonel. There's an automatic transactional relationship that is established just based on who I am. When the general walks in and wants to talk about the bazaar, there's automatically a relationship there. Well, if the provincial governor walks in, yeah, they'll respect him. But if they don't have that personal relationship with him, there's not an expectation that a transaction is necessarily going to take place, So they build on these basically concentric rings. If you think of the, centers of influence or a tree stump or something like that, it's, was it 6 points of relation to Kevin Bacon or something like that? That's the way they do business. That's how life is for them. And until you can tap into that and become a part of that, basically all you can do is be directive. And we all know that, we've got the watches, but they have the time. So they're going to wait us out, and that'll be the end of it. That was kind of a rambling answer, so I hope it made a little sense.
I think it makes sense, and we're also talking about very rangy topics that allow us to kind of veer off in a direction. I could bring you right back and have you talk about it again, and we would get. It's very rich conversation, and then we're trying to have sort of a format and a structure. One of the so I'm going to get back to these 3 taskings that you gave. Why wouldn't the Afghans take our aid? Well, there was no security was the ultimate answer. They didn't feel secure and safe from the Taliban, and the Taliban really had the vast majority of the influence. We had an influential bubble that would travel with us wherever we went, but as soon as we went back to the camp, we had maybe half a mile circle, and a lot of that is unusable mountain space that we can't do anything with. No one else can either, and so you realize that, and that one of the things I always use as examples. I think it's great. Like, well, how come the grape growers won't grow grapes on trellises? We all know that that's a better way to do it. But it is not a safer way to do it. The Taliban recognizes that as Western influence, and guess who comes knocking on your door? And there's nobody. There's no police. There's no border patrol. There's no army around to protect you. And so accepting that aid, except for, I don't know if you remember this, there was like a one-eyed vendor who had just had his entire life destroyed over and over again by the Taliban. And they're like, we have to let this guy live on something, so we'll let him run the only shop in town. So he was the one shop in the entire bazaar. And by the way, we would go see this guy all the time, and I'm like, leave this guy alone. And my counterpart who focused on threat was like, oh, he's a source. And I'm like, is he? Is he a source? For what? Like, what are we going to do? So you had this thing where they couldn't reliably take our help. And even then, like, what was our help? Like, they had a bazaar. It was just 7-Elevens through all the hamlets. They had shop owners, right? So there was that. The governor turned out was a great governor who was dying to govern, but we had to get out of his way. And I'm going to come back to the governor, so let's put a pin in that. But the connection to the government was the thing that we didn't know was lacking. There was really no connection to the government for any of the locals. And so we were trying to determine this, because what ultimately we were trying to do is work through the winter, get a jump on the Taliban so that our influence had grown while they were bedded down for the winter, because we don't mind working in the winter.
Right. Yeah. And so we started down that path. You guys were able to start getting stuff for us. We had some great, small unit leaders that were able to get in there and start building those relationships, started having more frank conversations with the Afghan police and the Afghan security forces about what they were supposed to be doing and how we could assist them in doing that, rather than just, for a long time it was, hey, we're going to go on patrol tomorrow. You guys be here at 8 o'clock and follow us. Well, that's not how you provide security in that area. That's how you make yourself a walking target and broadcast to everybody where the Americans are. So we had to learn those lessons. We had to learn them at the junior officer, junior NCO level, the lieutenants, the platoon sergeants. Those are the folks that started turning things around for us. It wasn't because we were making great decisions up at the higher levels. It was because the folks on the ground learned to trust each other and learned to work together for those things. And then we had to figure out, where the landmines were. And I don't mean that in terms of explosives. I'm talking about in terms of cultural landmines. For instance, the one that I always just laughed about was how we didn't understand culturally how they handle water distribution. Right. And water in Afghanistan is a very precious commodity, more precious than gold. And so we came up with this plan that, hey, we're going to build this dam and dam the river, and we'll provide all this water to the village so these guys can have better crops, more productive. They don't have to worry about source of water, whether it runs low in the dry season. And we started building it, and all of a sudden we started getting all this resistance and all this friction. And then by asking the right people the right questions, we found out, hey, they've already got a water rights program, and there's a family that traditionally runs it, and you just stolen all of their power and prestige by trying to take it away from them and build this dam. So we had basically sabotaged ourselves and made people turn away from us from what sounded like a great idea, but it's because we didn't culturally understand that there was already a program in place, and then attempt to work through that to provide them better access to the water.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the check dam story. So this is just briefly for the audience. A check dam is a minor thing to divert water, build it up, and, like in this case, flood an irrigation ditch. How do the Afghans do this already was just with a small gas-powered motor. And they would just put a hose in one end and put a hose on the other, and water goes in. And it was all negotiation. And there was actually a guy, and I can't remember his name or what his title was. But yeah, like his title in Arabic is like the water master. And so this check dam turned into an actual physical dam. And Greg, the commander of the company there, or the platoon, he had a great picture of this beautiful dam that was holding back water. But if you were standing on the dam, this thing had been provisioned 3 times to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's water leaking under it. There's water leaking around it. The Afghans had hacked away at it in the past, trying to get water through, because that was how they did things. Like, why are they doing this? Like, well, they hate this thing. It also denied some people access to a mosque they like to use. All of these things. And again, you ask the army. This is my job, is to ask the army and show the commander, here's what's going on here. Hey, have you guys talked to the water guy? And they're like, no, of course not. My commander wants me to build this dam. And everybody's doing their best. Like, I understand, like everybody's trying hard. So anyhow, I had alerted, because they kept briefing this and briefing it all the time, and like how they're going to fix this problem. But they were focused on the dam, not the actual problem. And so the locals were saying the very first time that there's a thunderstorm, that whole dam is going to be gone. And I'm like, I cannot wait. And so like the whole night, there's a like classic like huge thunderstorm, and I'm like, I cannot wait. I can't wait in the morning. I want to go out and see, because you could see the dam was like, it was struggling to hold back the water, because it was really a bunch of uh, fiberglass and wire baskets filled with rubble and concrete, and it wasn't an actual like one solid thing. Um, Long story, a little less long. Myself and this Liz, my teammate, we walked out there after that first storm, and this dam was a massive structure. It was probably 20 feet high. We walked across it. That entire thing was gone. And it was great because in my report, I put the dam, and then I put a strike through in that, and I put river. Because that thing, I mean, I don't know, it had to have been $250,000 just in a second, just disappeared. And we got the message. We stopped worrying about that stupid check dam and stopped putting effort into these things, because it wasn't going to lead to a win anywhere.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we did that at the national level all the way through. I remember I had a conversation. We had some Army Corps of Engineers folks come to me. They needed to go down south into bad guy territory to check on a road project that had been commissioned. And so I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. What are you guys doing? What are your actual requirements? Why do you need to go down there? Because, at this point, I was never one of those guys that's like, charge. We got to take the fight to the enemy. I was always like, hey, let's help the Afghans. This is their country, their war. We're not going to win it for them. So don't take any risk unless the benefit outweighs that risk, right? So why would I go down in Indian country to help you look at a road? What's the road for? Oh, we're building it to the border with Pakistan. Oh, that's fantastic. And why are we doing that? And they, it's going to be increased trade. We're going to put a checkpoint down there to go back and forth. And I'm like, well, is there a road on the other side in Pakistan? No, there's not. But we think they might build one if we build the road to the border. And I'm like, so we're building a road to the border in the hopes that somebody else might build a road to connect with it, so that we might someday have some trade back and forth between the two countries. Yeah. And I'm like, we're not doing that, and I'm not taking you down there. The guy says, but you have to. I said, no, I don't.
Yeah.
He goes, yes, you do. General Petraeus is the one that approved this. I'm like, yes, but did anybody ever ask him if it was a good idea? So we went back and forth, and I ended up telling him, look, we are not investing effort, and I am not taking risk with anybody, mine or my Afghan partners' lives, for a road that makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it's I'm putting a link up to a little thing I wrote about the check dam, and that road story is the same story across all lines of effort that we constantly did. We never got those wins. And again, like when you and I were realizing wins, there was this multi-decade land dispute in once we got out of the governor's way and said, what do you want to work on? He's like, there's this dispute that I want to deal with. And I don't want your help. I don't want your presence. I'll let you know when I'm ready for you. But you noticing these elders coming at night, I'm working on this thing. All right, so what do you need from me? Just to stay the fuck away and leave you guys alone? Yes, that's all you got to do. Great. And I'll let you come in and capture it on the back end. And so that's exactly what we did. And they settled this thing. The Taliban couldn't settle it. We've been there for 10 years, had no idea about it. There was nothing that I could find in the notes on the intel side that discussed it. And he resolved this thing. And there were a couple things to learn about that. Was here's this huge win. We had to let people know, hey, here's this huge win. Here's the government doing something for the people, with the people. It had nothing to do with us. That's the government working. Here also is this conflict that we didn't know about that was leading to any kind of lethal activity is perceived by us to be like this thing where that's combat. Like, well, it is to them, but to us, it's just civil unrest between themselves or whatever. And so just understanding that part of it. And the final thing is when they made this decision, there was a religious elder there, and we conducted shuras, these meetings all the time. And these meetings never had a religious elder showing up to say, yeah, I'm here to be the religious authority. We would just call these meetings, compel attendance, and then make decisions, and then nobody would do anything because we were culturally out of sync with what they did. And that was a big lesson for me, because I was always looking like, when is the religious person going to come in to make this thing an actual meeting that actually is going to go somewhere because there's buy-in.
Yeah, and that's the lesson that we all had to learn. We learned it over time. We got better at it over time. But some folks did, some folks didn't, and it depended on where you've been and the exposure that you had. And what we tried, but it's very hard when you're getting that type of lesson that's coming so quickly, so many places, so many different times. How do you disseminate that across the formation, right? I mean, when we're talking about all of DoD and our non-governmental organizations and our federal organizations that are all over there, all of us trying to do the right thing, all of us supposedly working toward the same goals. Lessons learned here did not necessarily filter over there. And then you also have the fact that in a country like Afghanistan, it is so compartmentalized by the terrain itself. Lessons learned in one place may not be applicable in another place. So how do you filter through that? You know, now you've been given a jigsaw puzzle to do, but as you start working at it, you find these pieces that fit and you find those pieces that fit, but then you realize that, hey, last time grandma put this away, she dumped all 5 puzzles in one box. So now I'm trying to build 5 different puzzles and figure out where the pieces go and how they fit to get the complete overall picture. So it's incredibly difficult, that's for sure.
Let's go back to the size, scape, and the challenge of dealing with things on the land. Like you said, we were provisioned via air, you know, and I remember I was going to go out, and one of the tricks I learned was when you go to a new place, or if you have been gone for a little while and you're coming back, it was always good to bring a 5-gallon drum of ice cream, because nobody's mad at the civilian guy who brings ice cream, right? And I'd always try to do it the right way. I'd go see the supply person, the 4, and I would say, hey, here's what I want to do. Just need a memo from you. And then they'd be like, they get ice cream, and I'm like, I promise they don't get ice cream. And you would convince this, I would convince this captain, hey, this is an important thing. It helps me out. And they're like, all right, fine, go ahead and go and do it. And so I would show up in this way. That's how remote these places were. So when the new brigade came in and relieved the brigade that was over the top of you during our stay, I remember hearing the commander like, we're going to push south, the Taliban, we're going to encircle and right hook and all of these things. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. And I knew this guy knew better, and I didn't know why, but I'm like, I know this guy'd been around. And it turned out a previous commander, the one that taught me to speak commander at battalion level, he was his operations guy when this brigade commander was a battalion commander in Iraq. And so once I found that out, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy knows, like, we can figure things out. And we actually had a lot of success. But even his plan they worked on for months pre-deployment was completely obsolete, because they weren't going to push the Taliban anyway, especially in the middle of the winter. And even then, it's like, hey, when you get these vehicles off of the main route and you start pushing them south, these are old, worn out vehicles. These are like bow-backed horses, you know, and you're trying to put all these people on it. And sure enough, they tried a couple of times. A gigantic boulder the size of a house fell into one of the passes that they were going to use. And their engineer's like, I can move any rock. And he's like, well, ultimately had to, and I watched him say it to the commander, I can't move this rock. It's too big. And there's too many rocks above it, right? And so it's like this comedy of errors. So there's that aspect, and then I want to throw in the ground level aspect. You closed down a very small base way out, like several districts off the main route in the Arghandab Valley, and you can only ask so much of these guys because there's not enough of them, and you can't reliably get to them, at least as a land force, maybe as a helicopter, but good luck having that happen fast, because it's just it's so far from anything. So talk about those challenges as a commander.
Yeah, those challenges, I mean, it was very difficult. As you know, we had several of our locations you could only get to by air. They were extremely dangerous. You're trying to do everything, you know, over the radio to provide the support that they need to them. You're dealing with the terrible terrain that makes everything 10 times harder than you would normally think of it, as well as the weather itself, you know, the extremes of heat in the summer that limit the loads your helicopters can carry because the air is too hot and thin. And then in the wintertime, you're dealing with snowstorms, blizzards, frozen everything, frozen rivers, all that stuff, bridges that get washed out, you know, that stuff happens all the time. So you've got to figure out, how do I command and control around here? How do I provide? Because at that point, like you said, you're not fighting a fight. I am not sending people on a flanking maneuver while I lay down a base of fire. I am trying to provide resources to the people that are actually on the ground who are interacting with the host nation. So I've got to figure out, number one, what do they need? Number two, how do I get it to them? And then maintain it so it's a trustworthy source that they're going to be able to utilize. And yeah, the cop you're talking about was Cop Balo up in Deschopin. Been there for years. Was infamous because it took fire almost every day. The reports would go up to RC South. We called the LZ 3-second LZ because when you were under observation, the helicopters had 3 seconds to get you off and take off before the mortars were in the air. So dangerous place. And, I had a great platoon leader there, the best platoon leader I had, Charlie Tim, fantastic platoon sergeant there. They took great care of themselves. There was a SEAL team that was working in the area trying to train security forces. And they had developed a relationship with the host nation governor and the town mayor and those kind of things. We tried to do some of the projects. We tried to do a school. We tried to influence the bazaar, but none of them really seemed to take any traction. And that's when I went back and said, hey, what have we accomplished in this valley?
Yeah.
And so we started digging through the historical archives, started looking at it, and I found out, other than put a few buildings up, which were now pockmarked from mortar shells and rifle bullets, not much. How many security forces do you think we had recruited and trained from the local area? Zero. Not a single one. And I'm like, okay, I figured it out. We were spending roughly $1 million a month to provide food, ammunition, resources, fuel up to that cop. And I'm just like, we're not getting any benefit out of it. All we're doing is we're putting targets up there. And why do we need to do it if we're not getting a benefit? And so then I had to turn around and go back to the brigade. And then we had to turn around together and go to RC South to convince them that, hey, this is a waste of resources. We're not getting our bang for our buck. The mindset is there. It's not just in the military, it's in the business community too. You got the sunk cost idea, right? Well, we can't give it up because we've already invested so much into it. Yeah, but that's gone. Whatever investment you put into it, it's gone, and nothing you do is going to get it back. So you can't let that come into the decision making. You have to look at the situation the way it is now. Is the investment going to pay off? And it's not going to. So we had to make the decision to close it down. And then that turned into, once again, when you're doing everything by air, that turned into a major logistical operation to get everything out of there, close it all down, and make sure we were doing it right, where we weren't leaving any of our host nation forces or friends in the lurch as we did so.
One of the things Rich and I wrote about, and this is academic writing, right? So this is like a legit piece of work here, was I knew, just because our networks are small, I knew a lieutenant who became a FAO, I'd be interested in that. And he was in charge out there for a while, and there was an election. And they're like, hey, we need you to push out. And it's actually a lady from the State Department that came out. She's like, I need to go out and we need to find out how many women voted in this thing. And he's like, not a fucking chance. Like, no way are we patrolling to ask how many women. It's so disconnected from reality. Okay, look, could we patrol? Yes, I'm an Army commander. We're gonna go put ourselves in this. It's not about a fear. It's like, what's going to happen for the next month after we do that? What bombs are going to be put out in place that we don't even know that are there because we're not patrolling that much? Why are we asking this question? Why are we exposing women to harm? Why? Like, it was all these problems, right? And so it was part of this whole thing about female engagement, and we haven't done the work to earn the right to actually work on this problem. And like you're saying, a lot of our effort and money is going just to existing out there, because these are not places out where we were in Mazan, and it's a bunch of dudes, but we were limited in our water consumption. We had to limit our laundry, we had to limit our showers because we just didn't have enough resources during the summertime. And so a lot of your resources goes to just like, how do we survive this next month, and how much is it going to cost us?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the basic subsistence by itself was just an amazing amount of effort had to go into it. And it's something that's kind of taken for granted by a lot of people that haven't been in those conditions. I think back to, I've been reading a lot of history books about the early history of our country here lately, and they talk about the Western movement, the Western migration, and just the sheer enormity of survival. Oh, yeah. How many hours a day you would have to expend energy in just to survive, let alone accomplish anything else, like building anything or, teaching anyone or any of that other stuff. It's truly when you find yourself in those conditions, the light starts to go on. We get so spoiled and we think we're in, just this morning, I was cursing and kicking furniture and everything because my internet went down. Oh, yeah, that's a tough problem. Yeah. Lucky you, huh? No wonder you're so upset.
Oh, my gosh.
We get insulated from that stuff, and we forget what it's like till you get in those conditions. And hope I hit what you were looking for.
It's always illustrative, too, when we talk about the space and the challenge of just moving across it, and at whatever level, like a high level, low level. A whole district on our provincial map was just grayed out as if it didn't exist. Khaki Afghan. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to brief about it. It's not even on the map, but in reality, there it was, and it's a place where we're like, it's just too hard and too dangerous to be out there for too long. If something had happened up in Japan or Apgar or one of these other places where, as a presence, but you guys didn't have a tasking to be there, can you even do anything reliably about a major attack if it happens?
It would depend on what assets and resources were available and what else was going on. That's the other thing that a lot of people not familiar with the military, they automatically assume, oh, those guys have everything they need. They've got all the money, all the forces. If something goes wrong, it's obviously because someone screwed up. Well, no, we have a finite amount of resources and you have to allocate those appropriately. And you never know what else is going on that may require those same resources at the same time. And that's when commanders step in and they have to prioritize and they have to say, okay, I am going to assume risk here because this is more important at this time. Yeah. And those are tough decisions. I mean, those are decisions that you have to live with for the rest of your life. You have to, look the family in the eye and assume responsibility for what you did. You've got to do it, but man, it's something that it never ever got any easier, and it's something that I think about every single day. And a lot of it, the other part that, and they knew this, is it's the weather too. You can't control the weather. I may be able to get you fast movers or attack helicopters, somebody to provide support to you. I may be able to get some aviation and get a supporting force to come in, but if the weather doesn't cooperate, it's not going to happen. That's just the way it is. And when the bad guys know that and they take advantage of it, you kind of use, we always say the enemy gets a vote, right? You can come up with the best plan in the world, but the enemy gets a vote. Well, guess what? The weather gets a vote too. And we had, I don't know if you were around for this one, you may have been out in one of the villages. We had a major operation plan, a major air assault operation plan south of the river that we were going to do in the wintertime. Nobody had been in there in several years. There were a couple of villages there that we wanted to go in, establish contact with, and try to tie back into the district governorship. Because not even the Afghan security forces or Afghan police had been there in years. So we came up with this great big plan. We got all of our Afghan forces together. We rehearsed, we got ready, talked about how we were going to do the air assault, came up with this grandiose plan of how everything was going to take place. And then the day before we were supposed to go, the blizzard hit. And all of a sudden, we are just inundated with about a foot of snow. There's zero visibility. Nobody could do anything. And, I had to sit down with General Jamaldine and we had to talk through, hey, what is this going to mean? How are we going to do this? What's going to happen? And they were like, yeah, we'll go. Yeah, we'll go. And I'm like, okay, well, where's your equipment? Well, I'm wearing it. I'm like, no, where's your cold weather gear? Where's your wet weather gear? Where's your sleeping bag? You're going to go out there in a polycotton uniform and some, plastic boots. Well, yeah, that's all I got. So then I had to turn around and go back to the brigade and RC South and say, we're not going to do this air assault. And then I got questioned, well, why aren't you going to do it? I said, the weather conditions just won't allow it. And they're like, yeah, but the weather's going to clear. I'm like, it's still going to be 20 degrees and there's still going to be a foot of snow there.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, but you guys have cold weather gear. You guys came from Alaska. You can do this. And I'm like, yes, we can, but our partners can't.
Right.
And once I finally got that message through to them, they're like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, you're right. So what we did is we instead took all those forces and we turned it into a training session because we had planned the air assault. we had figured out what we wanted to do and what the tactical plan was. And we turned to General Jamaldine, his staff, and those guys, and we said, okay, let's do it again, but this time you're going to plan it and you're going to tell us how we're going to do it. And then so there was a great way for us to, hey, this is how American staff work together and the kind of plan we would come up with. But let's flip it on its head. And now you guys show us how you would have planned this and how you would want to see it done. And so there was a lot of learning going on both sides, a lot of relationship building. It was a way to take something that was a negative, the fact that we had to cancel the operation, it just wasn't feasible at that point. But we were able to turn it into something positive that helped us accomplish the goals we were trying to get to anyway.
This is people aren't going to understand how big of a lesson this is, because you see, a commander is supposed to have, like, I can solve any problem, you know. And there was an example in Iraq. I was with Colonel Green and the Polar Bears, right, 431 Infantry, and he's the guy that taught me how to speak, you know, combat commander. And I had been there before him, right? I gained him, not the other way around. So I had a lot of experience, and there was a couple things I was able to impress upon him. One, you know, we're trying to defer to the Iraqi partner, and there was this general, and the commander before, he called a meeting, the Army colonel did, on his camp. And so the general drove over, and there was a problem, and the gate got locked out, and they're like, nobody's coming in right now. So they sweated that general out in his car off the camp for hours, and he never ever forgave them for it. And he always held it against every American commander afterwards. And I would try to explain this to Rich, and Rich got it, but it was like, this stuff doesn't happen in the first pass, the first conversation. You have to, like, show him, like, he's pissed. He grabbed us afterwards, and you know what he brought up 3 times? He brought up that thing in our secondary conversations. And so you start to understand that these things are there's problems that you're given that you can't even begin to understand, because you're a colonel. You're like, I'm the boss. And the counterpart to that story is there's a whole bunch of fuckery going on at the gate. And the gate, by the way, is right by an active range on the camp. And so there's all this traffic going on. And Rich gets on the phone like a good battalion commander. He's like, everybody get the fuck out of my way. I'm leaving. And you know what happened? Everybody got the fuck out of the way. And he left because he had things to do, right? And so we have this imbalance. And I always look for that imbalance as an intel collector. Like, how can I help the commander find these imbalances so that we repair that? And the other story was, there was these windmills that were contracted to be built to, again, pump water inland from the Tigris. And the contractor failed to deliver the product for whatever reason. Every commander would obsess, like, I can do this. I can compel this Scottish guy to come down here and build. And it wouldn't just, Jeff, it couldn't just be stupid windmills. It's got to be like vertical windmills that are like, you know, like, and I'm like, Rich, let it go. No commander's going to solve it. You're leaving. The Iraqis have never cared about it. They see where the bait, like, they existed, but they didn't work. None of them care. The guy who lives right there in that river right there, he's got a Chevy 350 motor with a pump attached to it. You know what he does? He just turns that thing on. And he's like, fuck, I hate giving this up. But that was the lesson, right? Like, this is not something that I need to do. I'm going to put my resources elsewhere. And that's one of the things I tried to give you guys, is like, here's a problem worth doing. Here's a problem worth leaving alone. Here's an answer to something you don't have to do anything for. It's free. So I'm going to bring this all the way back to when we were working together. We were getting really good because I learned all these stupid radio lessons because we were so bad at the radio. I'm talking about the REAB, Radio on a Box. It's like a broadcasting station for everybody who's listening that would send messages out. And we were really bad at this because we would have these canned messages. And we're in the country. We are a farmer, countryville, nowhere near the city. And I would ask questions. I knew to ask questions. So one, is the radio actually broadcasting the way they think that it was? No, it wasn't operating properly. So we boosted the signal up. And then you can test to see if it works. So we're doing all this work, and I'm reporting on, like, the incapacity of the radio. And so someone up at division level, RC South, says, hey, we're going to send Jeff a PSYOPs team to go to this area to help them out because they need help. And you said, absolutely not, because we're going forward faster than these guys. We don't want them coming in and disrupting it. And that makes no sense to most of us, because normally a commander would be like, yeah, great, send them out. They'll go out there. We'll find a place for them to sleep and they can go to work. But you said no, and you fought to keep that no a no. Talk about that.
You know, one of the lessons I learned along the way, some of it was when I was being trained as a foreign area officer. Some of it went from my experience back in SOCOM with and through. And some of it was having great bosses who taught me, hey, what do commanders do? You know, commanders assume risk. they prioritize, and they provide resources. That's what they do. So you figure out if it's anything outside of that, you don't need to do it when you're a commander, right? And so when you talk about assuming risk, I was taught by a great guy that ended up being a general officer, Colonel Twitty, that sometimes the risk you take is telling your boss no, because it doesn't need to happen. And I remember we were in Iraq one time, and we were starting to get a lot of intelligence reporting there in Mosul. And they came in, and the S2 guys came in and laid it out and said, hey, sir, there is going to be a major attack tomorrow. They are gathering stuff. They've got resources stockpiled. Everything's ready to go. It's going to be a major attack tomorrow. And he's like, okay, what are we going to do about it? So we called in, the police commander. We called in the Army commander. We talked to the folks at the governor's office, and they just said, we're going home. And we said, what? And they said, if we're not here, there won't be an attack. And Colonel Twitty looked over at me and he said, you know what? Cancel all the patrols for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll call the division and let them know. If we're not on the street, there won't be an attack. And sure enough, the next day dawned, nice and quiet. Everybody went about their business without us being out on the street. And then by the time we got to the day after, the situation had diffused. The momentum had gone out of it. And we just went back to business as usual. But he's the one that I think that taught me, and I carried that lesson with me. And the first thing I ever did, every time someone brought a project to me, time somebody brought an idea to me, my question was always why?
Yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish? And just because you have a resource doesn't mean you have to use it. A lot of times it's not worth the risk that you entail by doing so.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's fantastic. It's such a great lesson. There's a couple more things. Do you have a little more time? Because I got a couple more things I want to get into with you while I got you.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things I had learned is that the handoff on the American side is always, it struggles, right? Like, I'm not handed off. Like, hey, here's Pete. He's this invaluable asset. You're going to want to listen to him and like get that colonel to colonel handoff. And so, and I don't know how much of this but you did a great job putting effort in with the next commander. I don't recall his name. And he was like, yep, we just don't want to drop the ball. He gave Rich and I the task of like, here's our battle plan. Take a look at it. And we're like, wipe all this off. They were talking about like, well-moneyed Emirates and all these other things. We're like, stop. And ultimately they didn't listen. He didn't, even if he got it, he wasn't in a mindset or trained to be able to receive the help that we could give him, right? And so we did our best. And I was short. I was going to leave soon, but so they were going to shut down the Mazan presence. They were going to, and the LT there is like, hey, my job is just to box things up and get the hell out of here. Meanwhile, there's an operation that we'd worked really hard to figure out and make sure it was really truly Afghan-inspired, Afghan-led, Afghan-provisioned. And they were going to put an outpost out in the valley because everybody thought that would help at least secure this one. This is a massive area, everybody, massive basin. And so we were going to put a checkpoint out there, and it was going to be a joint checkpoint. And so these two things are going on. As the camp is shutting down, the LT would not engage with the governor because that wasn't his job anymore. And they were just working on boxing up and manning that checkpoint. And it turned out that he ultimately said, he was like, it was my biggest mistake. It's like I should, and I found this out from Rich, that checkpoint gets attacked by the Afghans in the checkpoint, and they assassinate 3 Americans out there. Think about this horrible thing. And I don't know, we could have prevented it if we were all there. Maybe we would have done something different. Who knows, right? I don't want to say that we were better than those guys, but the way they approached it was absolutely the wrong way because they stopped engaging with the governor. This thing went through like an American operation. It stopped being this collaborative thing, and it became the standard. Yeah, of course we can build a checkpoint. Of course we can put dudes out there. And people died because of that. And I want to bring in the other thing that happened. I don't know how much of this stuff you recall, and I don't know if you knew about that outpost getting attacked. And I'll put the link up for that.
I did hear about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about the outpost first. What are your thoughts about that? Would we have been better provisioned to do better with that? Could we have figured anything out? I don't know. So what are your thoughts on that outpost getting attacked?
I don't know. I mean, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and Monday morning quarterbacks are always right. When you're faced with that situation, just do the best you can. I know we were extremely deliberate in the operations that we chose to do. We spent a lot of time doing them, in that we weren't trying to accomplish 100 things at once, right? We were trying to accomplish one thing so that we could accomplish maybe two next time. We took that very deliberate approach, which wasn't popular with some of my bosses. They wanted to see more progress, more stuff done. But I knew that this was the way forward. This is the way it needed to be done.
Yeah.
We were lucky. We had great partners that supported us with the police and the Afghan security forces. And they taught us, they took us to the side and taught us stuff. They were very helpful of the support that we were able to provide for them. But once they learned, once they saw that we wanted to learn from them, as well as provide resources to them, that just strengthened that relationship and made it much deeper than it had been before. And so, you know, that decision, I'm not sure, but we were always very careful, very deliberate on the way we did those operations and the pace at which we did those operations. You know, when we did the opening of Route Chicken there, I mean, that was a deliberate set piece that I think we spent almost 2 months preparing to even begin that thing, with the stockpiling of resources, figuring out what checkpoints we're going to make, where they're going to be sited, how we're going to build them, how much road we're going to attempt to clear each day, you know. And we made the decision that when I briefed the plan to my boss, he's like, "How long is this going to take?" And I'm like, "I don't know. It takes until we get done." I said, "We're going to work at the pace of the work, not to a time schedule." And, you know, a lot of bosses don't want to underwrite that kind of risk. They're like, "Hey, I need those resources back. You've got 6 days. Get it done in 6 days or that's it. I'm pulling the plug." And, you know, I was lucky enough that I had enough WASTA that I was able to talk to him and say, "Hey, this is what it's going to be, sir. Here's, if you want it to be successful, here's how we got to do it." So I know we would have taken that same approach, but whether the outcome would have been different, who knows?
So one of the things that we developed as a unit together, and you guys tried to repeat this, right? And this is one thing's like, hey, you have this brilliant moment and it all works out, but can you repeat it, right? And so I made this thing. You might recall this, and this for the audience is the district governor's plan. And I'm like, hey, what do you really want to do? Like, what are you caring about? And so I made this slide, and I made it in such a way that, and I'm telling the audience, Jeff knows this stuff, but when I made the slide, it was like, what's your plan? So we took notes and we spent our time briefing it and everything. But the point of the plan was like, has anyone ever asked these guys, right? You know, what they wanted. What inspired this was the coolest thing I ever learned in all of this. And I remember I talked to you about this, but the district governor said to me, he's like, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And so I bring that to you and I'm like, hey, who's going to be the sword? And you're like, it's Zarif. He's the boss. We're going to follow his lead. And so we would run everything through him. And when he talked about this plan, one of the things on there is like, he's like, and he said this, he said, female education is my #1 priority. And I'm like, okay, great. He's like, before we can do that, we have to get boys educated, and to educate boys, we have to have security. And he explained security had 3 elements. It was, could the dude travel to and from work without, the dad travel to and from work without being accosted? Could he leave his compound alone as element 2 and have nothing happen? Then he could project kids out to get educated. That's what it took to provide security. One of the things that was going to help provide that was this checkpoint that was going to be out, and we kind of seal that valley off. And we're talking one valley in a district. And so that's what inspired this whole thing. And he talked about the vision he needed. And I kind of color-coded this to show like American involved. Here's the timelines and everything else. And you notice the checkpoint wasn't going to be maybe active until maybe, you know, April or so. And that's about when they got it going. But even then, it was a fiasco. And I promise there's not a checkpoint there now. That ability to let the Afghans actually say, yes, I have a plan. And some of this was born in, there was the conversation about the mayor of Kalat, which was the main city in our area of that province. It would be the Sacramento to my California. It would be, you know, whatever capital, right? So it's the capital city. And they're like, that mayor is a basket case. And so Rich and I are like, oh, is he? Great. And so that guy's like, I'm going to send my security detail over to my office. Let's have meetings. And so we would travel with no other Americans, just Rich and I, to go to this guy's office and watch him work and talk to him. And he's like, you can't bug me too much right now. It's end of the year budget meetings. I've got to get my budget. I'm like, this is not a basket case. And so we had the same approach with the governor on like what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it. And the checkpoint was part of that, but it was like this multi-tiered plan that that he was going to lead, and we were doing it. But again, that handoff, something dropped off, and that support that he had, he's like, I got to button up and get out of here. And he went back to the main city because he didn't have his partner out there that was his president.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff happens all the time. It is easy when you have those transitions for that to fall through. I mean, we talked about, excuse me. I mean, one of the things we did at the end of that tour was we talked about what does it take to transition. You, I, and Rich wrote that article for Small Wars Journal. And it's something that the Americans don't do well. We think we do, but we don't. We do good battle handoffs. We can tell you the sectors of fire. Hey, you're going to cover from that rock over to this road.
Yeah.
And here's your ranges. We can do that stuff. Here's your final protective fire. Here's your call signs for the medevac and the frequencies that they're on. We do all that stuff. Great. What we don't do is the passing of the relationship batons. And even when you do it well, which I tried very hard to, again, going back to our conversation before, relationships are personal. And just because I vouch for this guy,
right,
if he doesn't follow through with the plan that I have already discussed with him, he's going to lose that respect. And they're going to start building a different relationship with him to figure out what they can get. So that it's very difficult. And that's why the organizations that are very good at that kind of stuff tend to be the same people going back time after time, because you already have a relationship established when you come back the next time.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't do well.
The one of the things that I bitch about a lot is the ratio of our training. I'm not saying more training, because that's too easy. Like, you have to be sophisticated. It has to be a trade-off. And we train so much on lethality. And I'm talking about infantry battalions training less on lethality. So I know that's ridiculous from the jump. But the reality is most commanders, and this is from my experience as a ground guy who collects, and I'll say this, there is not a person who's better at tactical human collection than me in the entire U.S. forces, right? I've done it more than anybody else. I didn't graduate up. I didn't become a platoon sergeant. I didn't become a green to gold officer who never went to the field again. I stayed. I've got more combat patrols than any of those guys, right? And so you get better and better and better. One, I have no voice because I was on the ground. But the other thing is as you try to build this relationship, it's my job as the collector to become relevant to you. And if my intel isn't driving your decision-making process and how the brigade goes or how the battalion goes, and I'll say, Rich and I, the boss, the colonel, points at Rich. He's like, these guys are going to stand up. I want you to listen to what they said. And you know what we said? And you know what the colonel said? It's like, we're going to do less stuff. He's like, I got a big pile of shit here in the middle of the floor, and I don't want all this shit around. I want to pick very few things, do them well, and repeat that process. And we're like, yes. The sergeant major grabs us after this meeting. It's like, you guys have single-handedly turned this brigade around from our combat focus to the focus of the actual mission, and I want to thank you for it. Think about that. 2 dudes had that kind of impact, but only because I spoke commander. We worked hard. We tried to communicate across a lot of different people, but also you were able to uncommonly accept what we were doing and put us to work faster so we could help sooner. And look, we did not do all this ourselves. You guys helped. You guys did tremendous stuff. You guys were super smart and ready, but commanders aren't trained to receive Pete's message. They aren't trained to use a counterintelligence agent who's not necessarily collecting. How do you develop a colonel who can say, I get what you are, and if you're not as proficient as Pete, I can get you to where I need you to be. I can direct you, as a commander. I don't know. What do you do about that problem? I just don't know how to fix it.
Well, a lot of it is going to be, education, and I don't know what that cross-training, I guess you call it, broadening assignments.
Right.
And those are difficult to do in your traditional, particularly combat arms.
Right.
When they're on their career path, they're focused on warfighting, and that's what you want them focused on. They need to be lethal. But they also, because we're going to put them in these situations where they're dealing with other people, they're dealing with mayors, they're dealing with other cultures, they're dealing with language barriers. You know, they're going to be making, you know, city planning decisions. As somebody with a history degree, I was not well set up for that.
Right.
So how do we give them those broadening assignments, the capability to do that? I think part of it is, I mean, and we've talked about it, we need to spend more time building that into our training plan and our combat training centers, right? Build that stuff in there. Because at the end of the day, if you've got trained in lethal platoons, everybody else can muddle through, right? I mean, that's the fact of it. If you've got good lethal platoons, everybody else above them, you can screw it up and they'll be okay.
Right.
But you can, so take those opportunities to train your staff, to train your commanders on all these other things we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. And again, like how do you replicate a Pete, you know, a guy who's motivated to go out and is willing to, because a lot of my peers weren't willing to accept the risk of going off the camp.
Oh yeah.
You know, like they're like, oh no, and I'm like, no, I have to be up. Like that's my job. My job is to. I remember I would when I was at Huachuca, I would teach OBC, OAC. These are advanced and basic officer courses for everybody watching, and they're like, hey Pete, show everybody as a counterintelligence agent. You know, that's what I was. Show them like your field toolkit. It's a laptop and a camera. Now, back then, this is a big thing to older people, but to young people, they already knew about this stuff. And so I would say to them, you're an intel officer. Where do you put a counterintelligence agent to work? How do you employ me? Right? Because I knew they didn't know the answer, and that you have to like show them that. And so they'd be like, I don't know, maybe I'll put you over there by the Turkey 32. And they would say a bunch of, they would take a stab at it. I'm like, no, you want me off the camp, in the cafes, wherever it's permissible for me to go. And maybe I need a platoon to go with me. And one of the things that the colonels who got it, Rich Green got it. He's like, I have a personal security detail. You tell me where you want to go. We'll go there. Now, maybe I'll have to take over for the day, but wherever you want to go, you can go. And then the next colonel, they all started to get like, I needed access. Right. And so they figured out that my counterintelligence guy, my guy who's not reporting on threat at all. Matter of fact, he's pushing it over to my E4s who are actually collectors. He's giving them leads, and he's I'd bring people on camp. I don't know if they realized I was doing this, but I would walk Afghan VIPs onto the camp and have the sergeant at the guard salute him and not in any way search him, take him to the chow hall, feed him, and just work. Because once I got to the point where I had complete trust with Zarif, he would introduce me to all these people that no one else got to engage with because they weren't going to go anywhere near us, right?
Right.
And so how do you build more Petes? But two, like you said, how do you create the educational path? And I think you as a FAO, you were particularly skilled in the relationship side of things that most infantry commanders aren't, because as you said, your career is important, and saying no to a PSYOP team and doing less isn't a great way to get a solid rating on your OER. Right.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be able to assume that risk. You've got to have a clear vision. And, you know, the other thing that I was very lucky in is, I had, as we talked about before, I had bosses that trusted me and were willing to underwrite that risk that I was placing on their plate as well. You know, it's counterintuitive to people that have grown up in combat arms, law enforcement, that kind of thing. When you go out and you say, hey, if we have less patrolling, there'll be less violence.
Right.
That's counterintuitive, right? Because you're thinking, hey, I'm the person that's out there on patrol that is stopping the violence.
Right.
Well, not always. Sometimes you're the one that causes the violence, because if you weren't there, go back to Colonel Twitty's decision.
Yeah.
If you weren't there won't be any violence.
Right.
But it's counterintuitive to the way we normally think. And until you've got that experience and you've got people that have talked about it and seen it work, it can be a hard sell. That's for sure. And so trying to get that message across sometimes takes a while.
And not all violence belongs to us.
Absolutely.
Some of the stuff is just not our business. Some of that's just business. I remember the Iraqi general I was talking about earlier. It was election time, and they had put a bomb in this guy's house, and it went off. And I'm like, what's the deal with that? Are they targeting this guy? And he's like, no, this is just politics. If they wanted to kill him, they would have killed him. They just sent a message. And he's like, this is politics, And so you're like, okay, I know what you just said, but you have to have the guts to go, I don't get that. Explain that to me. And then he'll say something smart like, you guys have the same system. You just don't use bombs. You know, you
Yeah.
do all the horrible things to each other, and you're like, oh, and like you're so like you have to be willing to be dumb because you are, and then that way you can maybe learn, and then you ask the right questions, and then you build from there. And by the way, the boss is sitting next to me. You know, my guy is sitting next to
Yep.
me, and we're both like. And then later on, he and I have to go have a conversation. Like, did you hear what I heard? What do you think this means? Because this stuff is not. It's never black and white. It's always gray. And maybe this guy has an ulterior motive. And why didn't he do? You know, like, so it's mind blowing. But you have to have that counsel with
Right.
somebody else that you can trust.
Yeah, in fact, in my experience, I would say it's almost the opposite of what you just said. It's not black and white and gray. It's actually a rainbow. But what we see is black and white and gray.
Right.
And all those nuances and the flavors and everything that are going on behind the scenes, it's all the stuff that we hear in America. We have the exact same thing, but we've been living it for so long, we understand it and we're comfortable with it, so we don't have to think about it anymore. But then when you find yourself with another culture, now you've got to shift your perspective. You've got to figure out how they see the world. And because, I mean, everybody talks about it, but we learn it over and over again, almost on a daily basis. Perception trumps reality. Doesn't matter what the truth is. It's the perception that influences people and causes them to make decisions.
Yeah. When Rich goes out, and we used to love to ask this question, we'd point to the government center if it was anywhere near in sight, and we'd say, what happens in that building? And the guy, I love this story, the guy's like, that guy owes me money. He bought a goat and didn't pay for it. That's what goes on in that building. You as the commander are desperate for this knowledge because that's an indication that who cares about the fucking goat, right? It's the separation between what actually happens in the government building.
Right.
And so you can be in that government being like, oh, we're doing so much stuff. We're busy working all day. And you realize, hey, working, you know, like, and that's on you to go, stop. First off, any State Department person who's out in the field, get them the fuck off my battle space. Here's a riding helicopter to go somewhere else, but you're not staying here. Because that's the God's honest truth is those guys are just absolutely irrelevant. I want to get into the State Department in a second here, but I want to let you talk about that first.
About the State Department piece of it?
Or just in general, like, the ability to understand, like, it's your responsibility to get us tuned up when we're not going in the right direction and going, hey, I'm not going in this direction anymore. We're going to do different things. And then again, like whoever it is, I'm saying State Department because they suck, but in general, like these people need to get out of my battle space because they're making my job harder. I don't need people making my job harder.
Yeah. The free radicals, right?
Yeah.
The folks that are like, hey, I'm from the government. I'm going to take care of you.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think I tried really hard, and hopefully the fact that you're still talking to me means I did an okay job of doing it.
Yeah.
But as the commander, it is way too easy to get sucked in down at the platoon level, either in terms of combat operations or just in terms of day-to-day living and making decisions about who goes where and what happens. And as a commander, we had a whole province we were worried about, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be able to pull yourself back, take that macro view, the long-term, approach to things, and then figure out where you're going to put your resources and where you're going to assume your risk. And you've got to take those steps back. And the other part you do, I mean, we've talked about it with my intel collectors and all that kind of stuff. You ask those guys, who is not contributing? Who is not participating? What is going on that I am not seeing? And I had a very good network. I call them intel collectors, but they were guys like the chaplain and the chaplain's assistant. They were my driver. They were the RTO, my operations sergeant major. All these folks that generally sort of almost always blend in the background. And because of that, they get access, and people say stuff around them and do things around them that they would never do if I was anywhere close to them.
Right. Yes.
And so I'd be like, hey, okay, so I know what the briefing said, but now what's really going on here?
Oh, yeah.
Or I'd be like, we'd go to a location and I'd get out and I'd turn to the sergeant major and say, hey, take a bunch of those guys and go over and take them into the chow hall with some of the Afghans and tell me what they talk about when they're together. Yeah. Things like that gave me that depth that allowed me to kind of weave that into the big picture. And then it identified those free radicals with, hey, these agriculture guys are in here pitching all these projects and none of it's making any sense. And the district governor wants nothing to do with them, but they just keep showing up at the door.
Right.
And okay, let me see what I can do to give you some top cover and give you some space.
That top cover is fantastic. I think it was during our time, if not you had just left, but they were going to do a massive wheat seed distro. And by the way, this has happened dozens of times prior to us ever doing this, right? So we both had seen these kind of things before. And the ag team was an 06. He's a full colonel. The next promotion for him is general, for everybody listening. And he put out this email to everybody, and he kind of blasted the governor that I was working with, saying he was corrupt. He's connected to the Taliban. By the way, Mullah Omar lives 3 miles from us the entire time we're there. So we're firmly in Taliban country. So anybody there is related to the Taliban. There's just no avoiding it, right? And so he blasted this guy on how corrupt he was. And so I responded back, and I went like, I counterpointed him, bam, 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 because I didn't want us thinking about this in the wrong way, this wheat seed thing. By the way, none of them asked for any wheat seed. It just was like on the calendar, like today is the day when we have to have the wheat seed distro. And that email put me in a negative spot where, the DCO had to talk to my boss, because they wanted me out of that 06, that agricultural colonel wanted me off the camp because I had affronted him in some way. So this wasn't about mission and getting things right. He just took offense, and I'm just Pete. Who the fuck is Pete? Well, the DCO grabbed my team leader and rightfully so chewed his ass out because we gave him a problem he didn't need. And then at the end of it, Todd, my team leader, said, tell me where Pete's wrong, and then I'll work on getting him out of here. And the DCO was like, fuck, because he knew that everything I had said was reputable, because I wasn't new there. I had been around, and it completely changed it. But I needed that top cover. I needed a boss that had a big ass that could be chewed on for a while, because I do make mistakes. I am off the mark a little bit, and I need to be tuned up and dialed in. And that is not an easy thing to find a commander willing to, again, stick their neck out for some civilian guy, especially if I haven't done my job and melded with the sergeant major, and the sergeant major's undermining me all the time. There's a lot of politics. And especially if Pete's spending too much time with the colonel, and everybody gets jealous of Pete spending time with the colonel, because all these things have happened.
Yeah. And that's going back to leadership and knowing yourself as a leader and trusting your gut. And I guess the better way to say it is knowing when to be okay with being wrong. A lot of folks can't admit that. And, I tried really hard. I knew we were going to try a bunch of different things. And after you and Pete started talking, I knew we were going to try a bunch of crazy things. But I had to be okay with, I had to make sure my people were okay with, it's okay to fail. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Write down the lesson learned, and we'll go on to the next one, because nobody will tell the boss that it's not working, because they all want you to be successful. They all want their boss to be successful. So we will take things and spin them and change them into ways that make it seem like we're accomplishing what the boss wants.
Yes.
Even if we're not. And so trying to get people comfortable to know it's okay to say either no or, hey, this failed. I mean, I used to argue with my S2 all the time until I finally started working my way down through the ranks till I found a second lieutenant that was brave enough to say, I don't agree with that, sir. I think they're going to do this. And I'm like, okay, you're now my S2, because you're the only guy that'll stand up and tell me you think I'm wrong.
It's, I know in Mattis's book, he talks about, gather your mavericks. We have to protect those guys. And everybody thinks they're a maverick, but being a maverick gets you fired. I got kicked off of camps all the time. And it's a dangerous job. So everybody wants to be it, but it's not a safe pastime. And you definitely need those champions. The other thing I wanted to say about all of that, doing something different, is you guys would pick an operation, or brigade would pick an operation, and I would hear it, and I would watch how we communicated it, because I know the game now, right? And so I'd look on the slide and be like, they haven't accounted for like any of this social dynamic.
Right.
I would just go back 3 days or a week later. I'd go to Greg Benjamin and I would say, hey, can we get out to that district again as soon as you can get me out there? I don't want to put anything extra on the platoon, but get me out there, because there's gold on the ground out there, and I'll go pick it up. And so then I go out there and I'm like, hey, what happened here 5, 6, 10 days ago? And then I let them answer. And when they never talk about the government of Afghanistan doing anything, I have to tell you this. I have to go, hey, that operation, I can't find anybody that wants to talk about it. Or if they do, they're like, they look over the shoulder and they go, whatever. Right. And so we're briefing to you, hey, the Afghan Minister of Agriculture came out and he led the Afghans on this thing. He did a training. And then Pete goes back and it's like, not really. That's not really what happened. Because again, as you said earlier, that reality is what those guys are reporting back to us. And that's
Right.
an indication that we're not doing our job good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where you find yourself getting into big trouble, because you're trying to provide resources and enable the government to do its job. But you're the 800-pound gorilla every time you show up in the room, right?
Yep.
I mean, yeah, maybe this guy's sitting at the head of the table, but everybody's looking at the 800-pound gorilla. I mean, there were times where we would keep the stats about attacks and events that had occurred and all that stuff, and we would start looking for where their attacks were trending down, where we were having success providing security and stuff. And most of the time, it was in the areas where we didn't have troops. They
Right.
were Afghan police and Afghan security forces doing those things.
Yeah.
But when you went out and talked to the people on the ground, hey, do you feel safe here? No, I don't feel safe. Well, why not? Because there's no ISAF people here. If the
Right.
ISAF was here, then we'd be safe.
Yeah.
And then, so now you got to try to spin the narrative and say, no, look at the data. You guys are safer now than when we were here.
Yeah.
And it's not because of us, it's because of them.
Right.
And then, ultimately what you're trying to do is empower their leaders with that data. No longer collect data for yourself in RC South, collect that data so the police chief, so the district governor can then use it when they communicate with the elders and the people in the villages.
The last thing I want to talk about is, so while we were there, Rich and I became very known because we were good at what we did and people wanted more good. And so they would like, hey, go to this district and do that again. And I'm like, in 2 weeks? It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But Colonel Howe, remember Colonel Howe? He was supporting the SF guys, like a mobile team commander. He's an augmentee for the people.
Right.
And he's like, hey, can you guys help us understand education? And we had already kind of been working on that. So we're like, yeah, we'll just kind of make this a bigger project and we'll just study the shit out of education. And so we got to this point where we had an unsolicited Afghan religious elder with us, several tribal elders who we'd never met before. And they started having meetings and talking about how to do education better because they were all desperate to educate their kids more too. And what it came back with was like and by the way, the Ministry of Education is having this meeting, and this is on an Afghan camp. And so it's only Rich and I from the American side. It's all Afghans. And it's like 5 to 6 of us in any given meeting, maybe less. And here was their directive to us. And all this gets written up in a report. And we had a big distro list. Everybody got this. And they said, under no circumstances will you ever deliver books or school items directly to the Ministry of Education. He will come and get them from you. 2, we were desperate for your help. We want to understand how to do this stuff better. Help us understand like what's working and what's not. Great. We're great at that. They don't need our help in any other way. And under no circumstances will you ever deliver books directly to kids. That puts our kids in danger, which puts you in danger, and none of us want that. So never, ever, ever deliver books to kids. And so all these recommendations and findings get written up. And there's a bunch of other stuff in the report, but those are the main things that we wanted to get across. And sure enough, a year after I leave, Ann Smedginghoff and some senior State Department person go out for a photo op based book distro to kids in direct contradiction of what these senior Afghan people were talking about. Yeah. And look, this isn't Ann's fault, right? She's working in a machine that's too dumb to know what to do and what not to do. And it killed several American service members. It killed an interpreter who was working in support of us. It killed Ann. It messed up the guy from the State Department. It messed up Ann's peer. And it was a horrible thing. And so you look around and you're like, we did all this great stuff. And still, not even right around a year later, still this stupid stuff that was, maybe they would have died that day doing no matter what, but they shouldn't have been on the road delivering books.
Right. Yeah. Again, like you said, we fought 21-year wars, and that's a pretty steep learning curve every time you come back to war,
Yeah.
And it just killed me. In all of my tours, I only remember one commander that had the guts to come in and say, okay, where's your campaign plan? What did you have planned for the next year? Great. Turn and hand it to his staff and say, this is what we're doing. Don't change a thing.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Every time you get there, somebody rewrites the plan because, I could do this better. Oh, I'm smarter. Or, we could do more.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said, okay, I'm going to take the plan that you've been doing for the last year and I'm going to do it for another year.
Yeah.
We're just terrible at it. And our system doesn't enforce, and it doesn't reward people that do that.
Yeah. You worked hard on your handoff, and I would say it, for the most part, it didn't work. And that's just what we have to accept, right? Because I was part of that handoff too. I helped, like we talked about it. Colonel McGuire, who became General McGuire, and had a fantastic military career after that. He's like, I want to have the best handoff ever. I want to protect the 82nd's legacy, because he was a brigade commander in the 82nd Airborne. And I was there. We worked, and we spent a lot of money. It's expensive to have us work on these smart books full of like, all these bios on people. And it's like, not good enough. Write it again. Do more. Get on the road. Go, 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 go. We were working, and I'm not joking, 36-hour days. You know how that goes.
Yep.
And like falling asleep at our desk, getting back to work, and then knowing that we're going to turn something in, it's going to get rejected because it was never going to be good enough, because we were the 82nd. We were going to outwork our problem. 10th Mountain came in. This is not a knock on 10th. It's just they were next in line. All units do this. They said smart books, and threw them away. And I can't tell you how many man hours and how much exposure we all went under to make these things. And they didn't care. They didn't want them. They weren't going to use them.
Right.
That wasn't what they were going to do.
It's not our SOP. It's not what we trained on at NTC.
Yeah. Yeah. You're the commander. We're going to do what you want to do. Could we maybe do fewer things and do them better? Okay, great. And most commanders, to their credit, got that. It's just how quick could they get it? And then how much could they possibly do on that limited scope in the time that they had there?
Right. And, like you said, nobody did it deliberately. These are all great Americans that are all trying to do the best thing they can. It's human nature. You see the same thing in the business world. How many times do you change a CEO of a major corporation and they do the exact same thing they've done for the last 10 years? Yeah. Almost never, right? That's not human nature. Yeah. When you get in charge, you want to make changes. You want to do things your way, even if you trust the person that you took the helm from. So, it's something we're always going to struggle with, I think.
Yeah. And you don't know how your handoff went, because you don't go back to that area. You never have that same job again. That's what, again, one of the things that made me unique was that I stayed in that field collector role year after year, unit after unit. And I learned the game plan from being at the bottom of it. And, there's no Army person that's going to come back and be like, hey, look at me in the exact same, like this never happens, not reliably. And so you have these challenges. I don't want to ask you any more questions. I want to give you the chance to ask me anything, since we haven't had a chance to talk, and I beat you up for an hour and a half at this point. But if you have time, feel free to hit me with anything.
Well, I guess the only question I have is, why the heck did you think anybody'd ever listen to me? This will probably be the most least listened to show you ever do.
Well, and that is terrible. I mean, I don't think that is true, but the things that we just talked about for 90 minutes should be played for any unit that's pre-deployment. Like, it shouldn't be hard. The Army should be desperate to have Rich and I come and talk to them, to talk to them, like, as a commander, as a collector, how do we do this better? But we don't. And when I talk to people who are in charge, they just, they love it. They love Rich and our with stuff, and we brief it. But I'm like, okay, now start cutting checks. They're like, oh no, we're not going to actually do anything about that. We're going to fight China. You're like, okay,
of course.
Yeah. So I really don't care if anybody listens to or not. I love having a chat with you. It's always been great to be able to just think back to that time, because we were so, even though nothing sticks, there's no wins that are left. If we went back to Zabul, we wouldn't recognize any of our work. But, it was a real magical time where, like, we're both these black belts doing things at a high level that really, honestly, no one else in the country is doing that. I'll just say that up front. Because you have to have me, you have to have you. We have to both be in that headspace where we could work together like that, and nobody else had that kind of success.
Oh, I mean, that was kind of the opposite of the perfect storm. Because I look back at that organization, that unit. It wasn't rainbows and unicorns, but it was pretty damn close, because we had so much talent. When I looked at the officers, the NCOs, the junior soldiers that were in that unit, I mean, those guys were so talented. And I mean, half the time I didn't have to do anything as a commander except get the hell out of their way, you know? And that's hard for a fat old guy to accept every once in a while, that, hey, these young guys actually have better ideas and do it better than you do. So Yeah, that was an incredible organization, and the exact right moment in time. When the shift had gone from Zabul Province down to Kandahar, and they pulled out, and we were the only Americans left.
Yeah.
It made it. It gave us an opportunity and some freedoms that we probably wouldn't have had elsewhere.
That's true, right? And then to your credit, you guys planned up, and these things take forever to plan, and so it's like this is going to happen. But you guys planned an air operation. That's all we need to talk about that. But it was based out of the camp that I was on, and when I say camp, it's a tiny little place, and you would come out because this is a pretty big deal. It's approved from several levels above you. And what's Jeff doing, everybody? He's leaned up against the wall, kind of taking a snooze because, And the thing was, is the young guys didn't get it. They're like, yeah, Colonel Stewart is over there taking a nap. And it's like, yeah, but he's done his job. He stayed up for days on end to get everything wired-tight. He now has trusted his leaders and you guys to go do the thing. It's finally his chance to rest and let you guys go have some fun. And even the young guys, like they had to be told that because they didn't understand that, you were giving them the privilege of mission command and to go out and do the job.
Well, it's funny because that exact same operation I had flown in with them. They had been there a couple of days. I flew in with them. And immediately, as soon as the helicopters left, the shooting started. And one of the lieutenants comes running over to me and says, sir, what do you want us to do? And I'm like, don't ask me. Go ask your company commander. I'm just here to observe. Yeah. And he's like, what? And he didn't get it that, hey, I didn't fly in here to take over. This is the company commander's fight. I'm here to get him any resources he needs that he doesn't have available. That's all I'm doing. I'm throwing my rank around so that he can focus on doing his job.
Yeah.
So
love it.
They were pretty surprised by that, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it's a great way to operate. So everybody, this is Jeff Stewart. He was a colonel in the Army, and he's a fantastic dude. And hopefully we'll find some more reasons to have him come on. But I love that we got to do this chat. This never happens. There's no other show that has this kind of we work together I shouldn't have been there. You shouldn't, but there we are. And we did it. And I just love that you did this. And so thank you so much for coming on the show.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Pete. It was great to be here.
Yeah. Stand by for 1 sec. I'm going to wrap this thing up.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by your